This is Parjanya, Assistant Professor of English at Sunanda Degree College, Darjeeling, and here I'll be continuing with my lecture on Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. And today I'll be talking about in my last lecture I've already addressed the various characters whom you meet in the general prologue to the Canterbury Tales. Today I'll be talking about the Wife of Bath's prologue and tale, okay, which is also part of your syllabus, okay. This lecture is being made available to you courtesy Radio Salesian 90.8 FM, and once again this is intended for the second semester student, and this is part of their core course 4, English Honours core course 4, okay. Now, we have already discussed very briefly, we have met the Wife of Bath in the general prologue to the Canterbury Tales, and I've already told you that she is the only woman character in Chaucer's, as part of, in Chaucer's group of pilgrims, who does not belong to the church. As it is, most of Chaucer's pilgrims are male, and the very few women you do meet in the general prologue, they all belong to the institution of the church. So the Wife of Bath, or her name is Alison, I'll be referring to her as Alison. Alison is the only character who does not belong to the institution of the church, okay. And in her prologue, she introduces herself to us as an authority on marriage and love, okay. She has had a great degree of personal experience with the institution of marriage, and we also find out that she has been married 5 times, okay, married and widowed, and she has altogether had 5 husbands. She says that many people have criticized her for these numerous marriages, and most of them have criticized her on the basis that Christ himself only attended one wedding, and that was at Cana in Galilee, okay. But the Wife of Bath, she has her own way of interpreting scripture. She's a very well-read woman, and she has her own way of interpreting the biblical scriptures. She says that men can only guess and interpret what Jesus meant when he told a Samaritan woman. She goes back to the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman, and she says that we can only interpret what Jesus meant when he said that the Samaritan woman, that her 5th husband was not her husband, okay. So she is someone who interprets the scripture as she wishes to, and this is her way of negotiating with the institution of patriarchy, with the patriarchal institution. Of course, the church itself is a patriarchal institution given the kind of time and framework we are talking about, Middle England, she has her own way of negotiating with these scriptures, and she will give the examples of Abraham, Jacob and Solomon. They're figures from the Old Testament, and she will say that if they could, these are very revered or esteemed figures in the Old Testament, if they could have had multiple wives, why can't a woman have multiple husbands, okay. And then there's also a section where she talks about virginity. She says that of course great fathers of the church such as Apostle Paul, he has proclaimed the importance of virginity, but then she reasons, yes, virginity is important, she says, but then someone has to be procreating so that virgins can be created, okay. So she says that leave virginity to the perfect, she says, and let the rest of us use our gifts as best as we may. Her gift, of course, is doubtless her sexual power, okay, and as will be clear through her prologue as well as through the tale that she will narrate to us, she uses this sexual power to her advantage. Remember, this is the Middle Ages, and women do not have substantial power in society. So the Wife of Bath, or Alison, she is negotiating with this patriarchal feudal society as well as the institution of the church in the best possible way that she knows how to, okay. She negotiates her way around patriarchy, and that is why, I call her an example of Chaucer's proto-feminism, okay. I'll be talking more about that subsequently, okay. The Wife of Bath describes her 5 husbands, some of whom were good husbands and some of whom were bad husbands. The first 3 husbands, she says that she married for their wealth, okay, and they were good husbands. By good here, she of course means they were good husbands, they were obedient to her, okay. And the 4th and 5th husband she married for love, okay. The 5th husband is a much younger than her. He's a young lad called Jankin, whom she met while on a pilgrimage, while she was already married to her fourth husband. Okay, and then the fourth husband died, and she got the opportunity to marry Jankin. Okay, and Jankin is a very interesting character. Jankin freely quotes from the existing sort of books of the time about what an obedient wife or an obedient woman should be, and the wife of Bath, or Alison, is constantly bantering with him. She's arguing with him about how all these textual material is wrong about women, and it is the obverse. Women should be in control of their husbands. And the two of them, Jankin and Alison, they get into frequent fights. And once Jankin slapped her, and she slapped Jankin, and Jankin slapped her back. And he slapped her so hard that she has gone partially deaf in one ear. Okay. Also, I told you in my previous lecture that she is gap-toothed. That is, she has gaps in between her teeth, and this is a symbol of her sexual prowess or her sexual power. Okay. Now, the wife of Bath, she tells a story. Okay, she tells a story, and this story is about a knight belonging to the time of King Arthur. Okay, King Arthur, you might have heard about King Arthur. He's a mythological figure within English history, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. So she tells us a story about the knight and the ugly hag, or the loathly lady. Okay, so what is the story? The story goes that once there was a knight in the kingdom of King Arthur, and this knight, overcome by lust, he raped a young maiden. Okay, and for this King Arthur was outraged, and he sentences the knight to death. Okay, and of course then the queen and her court of ladies, they intervene in favor of the knight, and they ask for pardon for the knight's life, and he is given a chance. He is told by the queen that he has 1 year at his disposal, and he has to find out the answer to a question. What is the question? The knight has to answer, what is it that women most desire? If he is able to come back after a year and provide the correct answer, then his life will be spared. So his death sentence is temporarily put on hold, and the knight, he goes out in search of the correct answer to this question or to this riddle. He meets various women, and different women come up with different answers. Some say that women want loyalty from their husbands. Others say that they desire power over their husbands. Others say that they desire, sexual fidelity from their husbands. So a lot of women come up with a lot of different answers, but he does not get the correct answer. And the year comes to a close. The year comes to an end, and the knight is sure that he is going to come back and he is going to be sentenced to death, because as of now, he has not yet found the correct answer. Okay, then he meets this loathly lady, or this old hag, who tells the knight that she can provide the correct answer to this question on one condition, that the knight will have to do whatever she asks of him. The knight agrees, because he has no choice at this point, right? It's either death or the condition of this ugly hag. So the ugly hag, or the loathly lady, she accompanies the knight to the court, and then she provides him the answer, and the knight answers that what do women desire the most? Women desire to be in absolute control of their husbands. Okay, the queen and the other ladies of court are very pleased with this answer, and the knight's life is spared. And then the loathly lady tells him that fine, now you have to keep my condition, that is, you will have to marry me. The knight is at first repulsed by this, and because she's an ugly woman, and he's a good looking gentleman, he's a good looking knight, so he does not want to marry this ugly lady. And he tells her, you can have all my wealth, you can have anything, but please do not ask me to marry you, I cannot do that. But the loathly lady, she is stuck to her condition, and the knight is compelled to marry her. At night, when the two are in bed, then the knight is once again, he is repulsed by her haggard appearance, and then the lady tells him, what is it you want? Do you want a woman who is beautiful, but at the same time who is flirtatious and disloyal to you? Or do you want an ugly woman who is loyal to you and she is good in bed? Then the knight gives her the answer, I want what you want. Okay, and then this woman transforms into a beautiful lady. The ugly hag, or the loathly lady, transforms into a beautiful maiden, and the two of them live happily ever after. Okay, so that is the wife of Bath's story. Okay, now what is the interpretation of this story? On one hand, it is a Beauty and the Beast-like story. Of course, here it's not the beast, it's the ugly hag or the loathly lady who is being transformed into this beautiful maiden, okay? On the one hand, there is a superficial transformation, the transformation of this woman from the ugly hag to the beautiful maiden, but on the other hand, you have a moral transformation on the part of the knight. See, why was the knight sentenced to death? And this is very important to note. The knight was sentenced to death because he committed the rape of a young maiden. And as you all might be knowing, rape is ultimately about sexual power of men over women. So at the end of the story, the knight has to give in to the power of this old woman. So there is a shift in the dynamics of power involved within the tale. Power shifts from the hands of the knight to the hands of this ugly hag or this loathly lady. So there's a transformation, there's a tip in the scale, there's a transformation involved here. Not just a physical transformation of the hag into a beautiful maiden, but also a moral transformation on the part of the knight, as well as a change in the dynamics of power. And this is why I refer to this tale as an example of Chaucer's proto-feminism. Now, what does feminism mean? Feminism, as you might be knowing, it refers to a political and ideological critique of the institution of patriarchy. Okay. Now, while the term feminism is indeed a much later coinage during the Middle Ages in England, of course, the term feminism may not have been in vogue, and maybe when we are using the term feminism in an unqualified fashion, we run the risk of performing a historical anachronism, but we can still say that both Alison as well as through her tale, she's projecting herself as a proto-feminist or someone that looks forward to feminism as a proto-feminist figure. Now, why is that? Because as I told you, both Alison has also had her way of negotiating with patriarchy, both the patriarchy of the feudal society of her time as well as the patriarchy which was prevalent within the institution of the church. She quotes scriptures, as we have seen, and she uses the scriptures to her own advantage. Okay. Similarly, within her story also, the story is ultimately about how a knight or how a man, a so-called an ideal of manhood. The knight was the ideal of manhood in a sort of society of courtly love, in a feudal society of courtly love like Arthur's England. And this sort of ideal of manhood, he commits an act of rape, and through it he exerts his control over a woman, and at the end, ironically, he has to give in to the control of a woman. Okay, so there is a shift, as I've mentioned, within this dynamics of power from the hands of a man to the hands of the woman. Okay, and that is why I call this a proto-feminist tale. It's about how power shifts. Also remember that although this is a largely patriarchal feudal society that we are talking about, the women of court, that is Arthur's Queen Guinevere, she also wields substantial power because she's able to grant pardon to the knight when he's sentenced to death by the king. So there are these instances of women exerting power, and Alison, ultimately what she wants to exert control, absolute power over her husband. On another level, the transformation of the loathly lady into this beautiful young woman, it might also be an indirect reference to Alison herself, who is of course now old and aged. And remember, her fifth husband Jankin was much younger than her. He was a young lad. So it might also be a reference to the fact that, she might not be as beautiful as she was in her youthful days, but in her heart she is a beautiful young maiden. So of course there are these various interpretations, and Alison is one of the most interesting creations of Chaucer, and she's also an example of Chaucer's proto-feminism. Okay, I'll conclude my lecture on the Wife of Bath's prologue and tale with that. Thank you so much.